Part 1. The second chance. Blood dripped from my frostbitten fingers as police sirens wailed in the distance of my previous life. My so-called billionaire husband had just fled out the back window, leaving me to take the fall. Now, blinking at the calendar reading May 2024, I stared at my greedy sister grabbing his photo off the kitchen island. I smiled. Have him, sister. Enjoy the nightmare. Breathing in sharply, my lungs burned as if still filled with the freezing muddy water of the Delaware River. I gasped, my hands clutching the edge of the cold marble countertop. Don't be so dramatic, Chloe. It's just a blind date. My mother, Beatrice, sighed, swirling her mimosa in a crystal flute. I blinked against the sudden blinding sunlight streaming through the bay windows of our childhood home in Calabasas. The scent of expensive jasmine diffusers and stale champagne filled the air. I wasn't drowning. I wasn't locked in the trunk of a stolen sedan. I was standing in my mother's pristine kitchen, 23 years old again, staring at two photographs sliding across the island. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Rebirth. It wasn't just a trope in those cheap web novels I used to read before my life became a living hell. I was actually back. Back to the exact day that sealed my tragic fate. Look at them, Beatrice commanded, tapping her manicured fingernail against the glossy prints. Mrs. Henderson from the country club gave me these two profiles. One is Arthur Dumont, heir to a massive real estate empire, currently restructuring a portfolio at Merrill Lynch. The other, she scoffed, her lip curling in disdain, Leo Harrington, a software engineer at some startup in Silicon Valley, drives a 5-year-old Honda. Honestly, Mrs. Henderson must have slipped his profile in as a joke. My eyes locked onto the face in the first photo. Arthur Dumont impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit, slicked back blonde hair, a smile that belonged on a billboard or a wanted poster. In my previous life, my mother had forced me to take Arthur. Sienna is too delicate for the pressure of high society, she had claimed, feeding my older sister the safe, quiet software engineer. I had married Arthur. For 6 months, it was private jets to Cabo and shopping sprees on Rodeo Drive. Then the FBI kicked down our door in the middle of the night. Arthur Dumont wasn't an heir. His real name was Richard Dalton. He was a ruthless con artist running a $60 million wire fraud operation out of a shell company in Boca Raton. When the feds closed in, he emptied my bank accounts, maxed out lines of credit in my name, and physically threw me into the freezing river to silence me before skipping the country. I'll take Arthur. Sienna's shrill voice snapped me out of my dark reverie. My sister pushed past me, her eyes gleaming with undisguised avarice as she snatched the photo of the handsome fraudster. Beatrice frowned, feigning a reprimand. Sienna, darling, I thought we agreed you needed someone grounded. Arthur is a high roller. He needs a wife who can manage charity galas and paparazzi. Mom, please, Sienna whined, tossing her extensions over her shoulder. I'm meant for luxury. You really expect me to date a guy who probably eats ramen and codes in a basement? Let Chloe have the nerd. She's always been the boring domestic one anyway. Sienna shot me a smug, challenging glare, expecting me to fight her for the rich prize. In our past life, she had played the victim, crying that I always got the shiny toys. Now, seeing the Rolex on Arthur's wrist in the picture, her greed had overridden her usual passive-aggressive tactics. I looked down at the remaining photo. Leo Harrington. Messy dark hair, kind hazel eyes, and a slightly awkward smile. In my past life, Leo's basement startup had revolutionized decentralized cloud storage. 5 years after this blind date, he had taken his company public, becoming the youngest self-made billionaire in California. He had treated Sienna like a queen, completely unaware of how she secretly despised his early struggles. I looked up at my sister, letting a perfectly crafted expression of mild disappointment cross my face to stroke her ego. If you really want him, Sienna, you can have Arthur, I said, keeping my voice soft and defeated. I don't mind taking Leo. Sienna smirked, triumph radiating from her heavily contoured face. Thanks, sis. Don't worry, when Arthur and I are summering in the Hamptons, I'll send you a postcard. Maybe Leo can fix my laptop if it breaks. I'm sure he'd be happy to, I replied, suppressing the wild, hysterical laughter bubbling in my throat. Well, that's settled. Beatrice said, clapping her hands together. already calculating the social capital Sienna's marriage would bring her. Sienna, you meet Arthur tonight at the Street Regis. Wear the red Valentino. Chloe, Leo suggested meeting at a local coffee shop. Try not to look completely unkempt. I won't, Mom, I said smoothly. I grabbed Leo's photo and walked out of the kitchen, the phantom sensation of cold water completely vanishing from my skin. Let Sienna have the luxury cars bought with stolen credit cards. Let her have the blood money diamonds. I was going to secure a peaceful, wildly successful future. And I was going to smile every single day as my sister unknowingly marched toward a federal indictment. Part 2. The right choice. That evening, the air was crisp as I pushed open the heavy glass door of Café Grumpy in the city. The bell jingled and the rich scent of roasted espresso washed over me. I spotted Leo immediately. He was sitting in a corner booth, hunched over a sleek Dell XPS laptop, typing furiously. He wore a simple gray Henley and dark jeans, a stark contrast to the aggressive, flashy wealth I was used to dealing with. Leo? I asked, approaching the table. He jumped slightly, nearly knocking over a paper cup of black coffee. He looked up and his hazel eyes widened. In person, he was much more striking than his blurry photograph suggested. He possessed a quiet, understated confidence that only came from genuine intellect, not borrowed arrogance. Chloe, wow, hi. I'm sorry. Let me just. He hurriedly snapped the laptop shut and stood up, extending a hand. It's really nice to meet you. I didn't expect you to actually come. Why wouldn't I? I asked, taking his hand. His grip was firm, his palms calloused from rock climbing, a hobby I remembered Sienna mocking in my past life. Mrs. Henderson made it sound like you and your sister were well used to a different echelon of dining, Leo said, gesturing apologetically at the modest cafe. I told her, I'm pretty tied up funding my startup right now, so a fancy dinner was out of the question. I prefer this, I said honestly, sliding into the booth. And I meant it. The absolute terror of dining at Michelin star restaurants, knowing the bill was being paid by defrauding elderly pensioners, was a trauma I was glad to leave behind. Tell me about your startup. Cloud infrastructure, right? Leo's face lit up. For the next 2 hours, we didn't talk about brands, country clubs, or trust funds. He passionately explained his algorithm for decentralized data encryption. I listened intently, asking genuine questions, remembering the massive tech empire this very algorithm was about to build. I also noticed how deeply respectful he was. He didn't interrupt me, he didn't check his phone, and he didn't boast. He was exactly the sanctuary I needed. Meanwhile, my phone was vibrating off the table. Sienna was flooding our family group chat. Sienna. Image attached a massive bouquet of 200 white roses. Sienna. Arthur just surprised me at the Street Regis. He rented out the entire rooftop terrace. Sienna. Image attached. A blurry close-up of a Cartier love bracelet on her wrist. Sienna. He says I deserve the world. He's taking me to Miami this weekend on his private jet. Cry about it, Chloe. I swiped the notifications away, a cold smile touching my lips. The private jet was a fractional ownership charter he paid for using a stolen American Express black card. The Cartier bracelet, a very convincing replica, manufactured in Guangzhou. I knew this because in my past life, Arthur had laughed about it while holding a gun to my head. Everything okay? Leo asked, noticing the glow of my screen. Perfectly fine, I said, putting the phone face down. Just my sister enjoying her date, but I'm having a much better time. Over the next month. The contrast between our lives grew comical. Sienna moved at lightning speed. Arthur moved her out of our mother's house and into a massive glass-walled penthouse in downtown Los Angeles. It was a classic fraudster tactic, overwhelm the target with obscene wealth so they never asked to see the actual bank statements. Every Sunday, family dinner became a stage for Sienna's gloating. One particular evening, we were seated in Beatrice's formal dining room. Arthur was holding court, pouring a $500 bottle of Opus One wine. He looked exactly as I remembered: sharp jawline, predatory blue eyes, and an aura of absolute arrogance. So, Leo, Arthur said smoothly, swirling the dark red wine in his glass. Sienna tells me you're a computer guy, fixing motherboards and setting up Wi-Fi routers. Sienna giggled into her napkin. Beatrice shot Leo a look of utter pity. Leo simply smiled, cutting his steak. Something like that. I'm developing security software. It's early stages, but we're securing our Series A funding next month. Series A? Arthur chuckled condescendingly. Cute. If you ever need some real capital, let me know. My firm handles 9-figure portfolios. But of course, we usually only look at assets with guaranteed returns, not basement projects. I appreciate the offer, Arthur, Leo said politely. But we're actually being vetted by Sequoia Capital. I prefer keeping things transparent and regulated. I saw a microscopic twitch in Arthur's jaw. The word regulated was kryptonite to Richard Dalton. Speaking of transparency, I chimed in, keeping my voice light and conversational. Arthur, I saw an article on Bloomberg about Vanguard restructuring their offshore assets. How is your team handling the new SEC compliance laws regarding shell companies in the Cayman Islands? The dining room went dead silent. Leo looked at me with mild surprise, impressed by the technical question. Sienna looked annoyed that I was stealing the spotlight. Arthur's smile froze. The blood drained slightly from his face before he forced a patronizing chuckle. Well, Chloe, it's highly complicated financial jargon, not something you'd need to worry your pretty head about. We have an army of lawyers for the compliance tape. I'm sure you do, I smiled back, taking a sip of my water. I knew for a fact the SEC was already quietly investigating his fake firm. The clock was ticking. Well, enough about boring business, Sienna announced aggressively, grabbing Arthur's hand and slamming it onto the table. A massive, radiant cut diamond sparkled violently under the chandelier. Beatrice gasped, dropping her fork. Sienna, is that? Yes, Sienna shrieked, practically vibrating with excitement. Arthur proposed. We're getting married. Oh, my beautiful girl. Beatrice cried, rushing out of her chair to hug her favorite daughter. A true high society wedding. I need to call the country club immediately. Actually, Mrs. Belmont, Arthur said, wrapping a possessive arm around Sienna's waist. We don't want a long engagement. I want to make Sienna my wife as soon as possible. We're thinking next month at the Plaza in New York. Next month? My pulse quickened. In my past life, Arthur had dragged out our engagement for a year to build his cover. Why the rush now? Then it hit me. In this timeline, the FBI must be moving faster. He needed to be married. He needed spousal privilege to prevent Sienna from testifying against him. And more importantly, he needed to transfer stolen assets into the name of a legal spouse with a spotless record before the government froze his accounts. Sienna wasn't a bride. She was a money laundering vessel. Next month? Beatrice said, slightly taken aback. But the dresses, the invitations, I'll handle everything, Arthur promised smoothly. Money is no object for my queen. Sienna looked at me, her eyes burning with a toxic mixture of triumph and spite. Did you hear that, Chloe? The Plaza. Maybe if you save up, you and Leo can afford a nice motel in Bakersfield for your honeymoon. Leo reached under the table and gently squeezed my hand, offering silent support against the venom. I squeezed back, looking right into my sister's eyes. I wouldn't miss your wedding for the world, Sienna, I said softly. I have a feeling it's going to be an unforgettable event. Part 3. The House of Cards champagne flowed like a shimmering golden river through the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, though the vintage tasted distinctly bitter on my tongue. Crystal chandeliers cast a dazzling fractured light across the sea of elite guests, illuminating a spectacle of grotesque unearned opulence. Sienna had spared absolutely no expense for her fairy tale wedding to Arthur Dumont. Or rather, the victims of Arthur's elaborate Ponzi scheme had spared no expense. Towering centerpieces of rare white orchids imported from Thailand dominated every table while a 1-2-piece orchestral ensemble played classical renditions of modern pop songs in the corner. My mother, Beatrice, was entirely in her element, practically floating from table to table in a sequined Carolina Herrera gown. She was introducing herself to men in bespoke tuxedos and women dripping in diamonds, utterly blind to the fact that half of Arthur's colleagues were paid actors hired to fill out the groom's side of the aisle. I knew this because during my previous life, I had recognized one of his groomsmen starring in a local television commercial for a mattress liquidator just 3 weeks after my own disastrous wedding. Look at her, Leo whispered, leaning close to me. We were seated at a table near the back, far from the spotlight. He looked incredibly handsome in a simple tailored navy suit he had bought off the rack. I've never seen anyone look so triumphantly happy. She thinks she has secured the world, I replied softly, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. But castles built on sand tend to wash away with the tide. Leo chuckled, clearly assuming I was merely offering a philosophical observation. He gently reached over and intertwined his fingers with mine. His touch was warm and grounding. A stark contrast to the icy dread that used to constantly run through my veins in my past life. Just yesterday, Leo had finalized a staggering $15 million series of funding round led by Sequoia Capital. His company's valuation was already skyrocketing into the stratosphere. Yet here he was, quietly holding my hand, more interested in my comfort than the extravagant display of wealth surrounding us. Sienna was holding court at the sweetheart table. She wore a custom-designed Vera Wang gown that must have cost upwards of $50,000, her neck adorned with a heavy glittering diamond collar. She looked like royalty, but the crown was stolen. Suddenly, the grand wooden doors of the ballroom swung open. I expected to see the catering staff wheeling in the 7-tier fondant wedding cake. Instead, my heart did a fierce, victorious leap. A team of men and women in dark windbreakers emblazoned with the bright yellow letters FBI poured into the room. The orchestral music screeched to a halt as the lead cellist dropped his bow in shock. The joyful chatter of 200 guests died instantly, replaced by a suffocating, terrified silence. Arthur's head snapped toward the entrance. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking like a polished marble statue. His charming, arrogant facade dissolved in a fraction of a second, revealing the cornered, desperate criminal underneath. He immediately dropped Sienna's hand, shoved his chair back so violently it crashed to the floor, and darted toward the kitchen service doors. "Richard Dalton, freeze! Federal agents!" The commanding voice boomed over the lavish ballroom. It belonged to Special Agent Christopher Miller. A tall, imposing man with graying temples, who I remembered vividly from the endless interrogations of my past life. Back then, Agent Miller had looked at me with pity. Tonight, his eyes were locked solely on the fleeing groom. Panic erupted. Guests screamed, knocking over crystal stemware and delicate china plates as heavily armed tactical agents rushed past them. 2 agents tackled Arthur just before he could reach the kitchen doors. He hit the polished hardwood floor with a sickening thud, his Tom Ford tuxedo instantly wrinkling as his hands were wrenched behind his back and tightly secured with heavy steel cuffs. "Arthur! What are you doing? Get off him!" Sienna shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly in the cavernous room. She stood up, her massive train knocking over a silver candelabra. She stumbled forward, her face a mask of absolute confusion and horror. "Do you know who we are? You are ruining my wedding!" Agent Miller stepped directly into Sienna's path, holding up a federal warrant. "Sienna Belmont?" he asked, his voice deadpan and authoritative. "It's Dumont now," she screamed hysterically, pointing at her glittering wedding ring. "We literally just signed the marriage certificate. You can't do this." "Actually, ma'am, that's exactly why we are here," Agent Miller stated, his expression completely devoid of sympathy. "We needed to wait until the legal documents were officially finalized. By signing that marriage certificate, you also legally bound yourself to the financial declarations your husband filed this morning. You are now officially documented as the Vice President of Dalton Global Acquisitions." Sienna froze. "Dalton Global? His name is Arthur Dumont. And I am his wife. His real name is Richard Dalton," Agent Miller corrected firmly, gesturing to the agents hauling the struggling, cursing groom to his feet. "And he is under arrest for 47 counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, money laundering, and violation of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. He has defrauded over 300 elderly investors out of $60 million. Beatrice, who had pushed her way to the front of the crowd, let out a piercing, dramatic gasp and collapsed into a dead faint, hitting the plush carpet. None of her new high society friends moved to help her. They were all too busy backing away, frantically trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of a federal raid. "No," Sienna whispered, her lips trembling violently as the reality of the situation began to fracture her perfect illusion. "No, he's a billionaire. He bought me a penthouse. He bought me this Cartier bracelet. She held up her wrist like a shield. Agent Miller glanced at the bracelet and sighed. Ma'am, that is stainless steel painted with rhodium. Richard Dalton hasn't had a legitimate dollar to his name in a decade. And since you willingly signed corporate documents listing you as a primary executive officer of his shell company, which I assume he told you was a prenuptial formality, you are also being detained for questioning regarding the laundering of stolen federal funds. Another agent stepped forward, pulling out a second pair of handcuffs. What? No, I didn't do anything. I just wanted to be rich. Sienna wailed, her pristine makeup instantly ruined as a torrent of black mascara tears flooded down her cheeks. The agent roughly grabbed her arms, pulling them behind her back. The loud metallic click of the handcuffs snapping over her wrists echoed throughout the silent ballroom like a judge's gavel. I sat comfortably in my chair, watching the scene unfold with a deep, profound sense of peace. I took another slow, refreshing sip of my water. Leo sat beside me, utterly stunned, his jaw practically resting on the table. Chloe, he breathed, staring in horror as Sienna was dragged kicking and screaming past the towering floral arrangements. Did you know about this? I turned to Leo, giving him a gentle, reassuring smile. I just always had a feeling his portfolio was a little too good to be true. It pays to invest in honest people, Leo. Part 4. Justice and New Beginnings. Months passed and the brutal reality of the justice system systematically dismantled my sister's life. The sensational story of the Plaza Ponzi scheme made the front page of the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal. The investigation revealed that Richard Dalton had indeed used Sienna as a naive, greedy pawn. He had fast-tracked the marriage specifically to transfer the titles of several illicit assets into her name, hoping to shield them from the SEC. Because she had happily signed every document he put in front of her without reading a single word, blinded by the promise of yachts and summer homes, she was deeply implicated. Sienna avoided actual prison time only by fully cooperating with the federal prosecutors, singing like a canary, and surrendering every single gift, dress, and fake piece of jewelry Richard had ever given her. However, the legal fees absolutely bankrupted my mother. Beatrice was forced to sell our childhood home in Calabasas and move into a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood in the valley. Her country club membership was permanently revoked. She became a social pariah, entirely shunned by the very women she had spent her entire life trying to impress. Meanwhile, my life with Leo was a steady, beautiful ascent. We didn't rush our relationship. We built a foundation on genuine mutual respect, deep emotional connection, and unwavering support. When Leo's company went public 2 years later, it was one of the most successful tech IPOs in the history of Silicon Valley. He rang the opening bell at NASDAQ and overnight his net worth eclipsed $2 billion. And unlike Richard, Leo's wealth was completely legitimate, built on brilliant engineering and relentless hard work. And unlike Richard, Leo didn't need to flaunt his money to feel powerful. We lived in a stunning, architecturally brilliant, but unostentatious modern home nestled in the quiet hills of Palo Alto. We drove reliable high-end electric vehicles, donated generously to education charities, and spent our weekends hiking the redwood trails rather than pretending to enjoy caviar at stuffy galas. Our wedding, when it finally came, was nothing like Sienna's disastrous spectacle. We married in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley, surrounded by genuine friends and colleagues who had supported Leo's journey from startup founder to tech titan. There were no paid actors, no fake jewelry, no FBI raids, just honest love and authentic joy. I wore a simple ivory dress that cost a fraction of Sienna's Vera Wang gown, but I felt more beautiful than I ever had in my previous life. As Leo slipped the ring on my finger, a stunning but ethically sourced diamond, I felt the final ghost of my past life release its grip on my soul. Part 5. The final reckoning. It was on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in October, 3 years after the Plaza incident, that my past finally came knocking on my custom-built oak front door. I opened it to find Sienna standing on the porch. She looked completely unrecognizable. The expensive hair extensions were gone, replaced by a brittle, uneven bob. Her designer clothes had been traded for a faded oversized gray sweater and scuffed discount sneakers. The arrogant, triumphant spark that used to define her eyes was completely extinguished, replaced by a hollow, desperate exhaustion. Chloe. she rasped, her voice trembling. Hello, Sienna. I replied evenly, not stepping aside to invite her in. She looked past me, her eyes widening as she took in the sweeping sunlit expanse of my home. She saw the priceless modern art on the walls, the sprawling open-concept kitchen, and the sheer undeniable reality of immense, secure wealth. I need help, she choked out, tears instantly welling in her eyes. Mom's pension is completely gone paying off the restitution for the civil suits. I can't get a job anywhere because my name is tied to Richard's fraud in every background check. I saw on the news that Leo's company. I saw how much you guys have now. She looked back at me, her hands clasping together in a pathetic begging gesture. Please, Chloe. You're my sister, you have billions. I just need a loan. $200,000 to pay off my remaining legal debt and get a fresh start. It's pocket change to you. I leaned against the doorframe, studying her face. In my past life, when I was the one drowning in debt, hunted by creditors, and shattered by Richard's betrayal, Sienna had laughed at me. She had told me I was stupid for trusting him and refused to lend me a single dime for a lawyer. Sienna, I started, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of malice. Do you remember the day Mom gave us those 2 photos in the kitchen? She blinked, confused by the sudden pivot. What? Yes. But what does that have to do? You fought tooth and nail for the man who promised you the world without you having to lift a finger to earn it, I interrupted softly. You chose the flashy watch. You chose the private jets. You chose the illusion because you thought you were better than everyone else. You mocked Leo. You mocked me. I made a mistake, she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. He tricked me. He didn't trick you, Sienna. He bought your greed. You saw exactly what you wanted to see, I said firmly. Leo and I built this life through honesty, late nights, and actual measurable hard work. We are not a charity for the consequences of your vanity. Sienna dropped her hands, her face twisting into a mask of ugly, familiar rage. You owe me. If I hadn't taken Arthur, you would have married him. I took the bullet for you. I couldn't help it. A genuine, bright laugh escaped my lips. Oh, Sienna. I assure you, I would never have married a criminal. Her eyes widened as the implication of my words began to sink in. Wait, you knew? You knew what he was? I smiled serenely. Let's just say I had excellent instincts about character. You set me up. She screamed, her face contorting with rage. You deliberately let me marry him, knowing I didn't let you do anything, I corrected calmly. You grabbed that photo with both hands. You demanded him. You called me boring and domestic. You said you were meant for luxury. I simply didn't stand in your way. You bitch, she spat. You cold, calculating bitch. You watched me walk into that trap. No, Sienna. I watched you run into it with open arms, I said quietly. And even now, you can't take responsibility for your own choices. That's why you'll never succeed. That's why I will. I slowly closed the heavy oak door, cutting off her furious sputtering. The lock clicked into place with a satisfying final thud. I walked back into the sunlit living room just as Leo came down the stairs, fresh from a shower, drying his hair with a towel. Was someone at the door? He asked, walking over and pressing a warm, lingering kiss to my forehead. Just a salesperson, I smiled, wrapping my arms around his waist and leaning my head against his chest, listening to the steady, honest beating of his heart. They were selling something I have absolutely no interest in buying. Good, Leo murmured, pulling me closer. Because we already have everything we could ever possibly need. He was entirely right. I had survived the freezing river of my past, navigated the treacherous waters of my second chance, and finally anchored myself on safe, golden shores. I had let my sister take the glittering poison, and I had claimed the true prize. Rebirth wasn't just about avoiding death, it was about truly learning how to live. And as I looked out over the sprawling, peaceful hills of Silicon Valley, watching the sun set in brilliant shades of amber and rose, I knew I was going to live incredibly, perfectly well. Epilogue, 5 years later. 5 years after Sienna appeared at my door, I received an unexpected letter. It was postmarked from a small town in Oregon, written in my sister's handwriting, neater now, more controlled. Dear Chloe, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But my therapist says I need to write it anyway. You were right. About everything. I chose greed over character. I chose the illusion over reality. And I paid the price. I've spent the last 5 years working as a cashier at a grocery store, living in a studio apartment, and attending court-mandated financial literacy classes. Mom refuses to speak to me, blaming me for her fall from grace. But something strange happened. I started to rebuild. Slowly, without shortcuts. Without looking for the easy way. I'm taking community college classes. I'm learning to code, actually. Turns out I'm not bad at it. I'm not writing to ask for money or forgiveness. I'm writing to say thank you. You gave me exactly what I needed: consequences. Real ones. The kind that actually teach you something. I hope you're happy. I genuinely mean that. You deserve it. I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I didn't respond. Some chapters needed to close completely before new ones could truly begin. That evening, Leo and I sat on our terrace, watching our 2-year-old daughter chase fireflies across the lawn. She had his hazel eyes and my determination. We had named her Grace because that's what this second chance had been. Pure grace. What are you thinking about? Leo asked, pulling me close. How lucky I am, I said honestly. How grateful I am for honest love, hard work, and second chances. No such thing as luck. Leo smiled, kissing my temple. You made every right choice when it mattered most. I watched Grace laugh as she caught a firefly in her small hands, her face illuminated with wonder and joy. In my previous life, I never got to have children. Richard's chaos had stolen that future from me. But now, watching my daughter play in the golden twilight, I realized that rebirth wasn't just about correcting past mistakes. It was about claiming the beautiful future you were always meant to have. And mine was more perfect than I ever could have imagined.